we were pitching Evolve for our pre-seed raise, and I think that was really our first experience of failing. I mean, we went through pitches after pitches after pitches and rejections after rejections after rejections.
We had zero marketing budgets at that point, right? Bootstrapped. We were like literally waiting for trickles of downloads to come in from wherever, whoever is able to search or find us. And it took us, I think, 2 months to get our first paying user.
One of the biggest wins that we had was really getting picked up by Google Play Store. And we got nominated for the User Choice Award. Like, we got nominated amongst the top 10 apps in India.
So that came at a time when, we were also getting rejected by VCs. We started seeing a lot of organic traction in countries like US, UK, which have more evolved mental health ecosystems. So it gave us a lot of conviction that, we can actually build India to the world, right? It doesn't have to be India as a market necessarily that we were pitching to VCs.
We ran an A/B test on the Google Play console. We ran a Google Play Store experiment, and we saw 50% uplift in our conversion rates. And we said, what? And our scale and our downloads just 2x'd at that point of time. And you're like, hey, there's something happening here. We've hit something here.
Welcome to a special episode of Millionaire Mondays in collaboration with Google Play, where we bring you the untold stories of some of India's most incredible app startups. I'm Caleb Friesen, and on the show today, how Anshul, Kamath, and Rohan Arora built an inclusive mental health app from India for the world and grew it to more than 1 million users. Mental health is a struggle for all of us, and that's especially true for members of the LGBTQIA+ community. 46% have experienced unfair treatment at work or school, and 40% have experienced rejection from family members or close friends. The community also faces 3 to 4 times the amount of mental health challenges like depression, suicidal ideation, drug abuse, at-risk sexual behavior, and STIs and HIV. The stress and anxiety created by these experiences can make the day-to-day struggles that we all face as human beings more challenging for members of the community. Evolve is a mental health and personal growth platform offering tools for mindfulness, stress management, and emotional well-being, and it specifically caters to the unique needs of members of the LGBTQIA+ community. The app combines technology with human expertise, featuring content from psychologists and life coaches, and this content is intended for a global audience. Using Evolve, you can participate in meditation sessions, emotional balance exercises, and growth-oriented learning journeys. Before Evolve, Rohan Arora had done his Bachelor of Engineering at BITS Bologna, and then he did an MBA at IIM Ahmedabad. Following this, he spent nearly a decade building his resume in the corporate world, and from an external perspective, Rohan appeared to be doing well. But amidst all of this career success, he was fighting a very difficult personal battle. As a gay man, he found society to be a challenging environment to be open about his sexuality in, so he kept quiet. And in retrospect, Rohan feels that he came out to himself too late in life. And this was something that he was struggling with when he met his future co-founder, Anshul Kamath. Like Rohan, Anshul had a stable job before getting into entrepreneurship, but after being diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune disease, he realized the importance of managing his own mental health, and this moment of clarity irreversibly changed his life. He was working at Shell in London at the time, but eventually made the difficult decision to leave it all behind.
Something deep in me told me, I need to actually go on this journey to find who I am, the causes or, the certain areas that actually mean something to me and make an impact with my career. And so I decided to move back to India without really having a plan. I then went on to join a very early stage startup. So I knew I wanted to be entrepreneurial. And I joined a startup, which at the time had less than 10 employees. And it was a tech startup. So really started getting my hands dirty with tech and product and data, working with, the CEO on fundraising. And that gave me a good reality check on, and a very, it was really grounding actually, going from an organization with hundreds of thousands of people where, your efforts don't really even make a dent on the balance sheet, to an organization with 10 people, where everyone's efforts day in, day out actually shaping the company.
There's so much more accountability.
Yeah, it's insane to actually see what you're creating make a difference, right? And I think that was something I knew I valued. And I still love it. Like creating something new and seeing the difference it makes is something I just love. And one of the first things that happened in that journey when I moved back is I got a chance to actually attend this program which was developed by Google. It's called Search Inside Yourself, which combines mindfulness, neuroscience, and self-awareness. And here I was, this 25-year-old guy at that time who had, gone through the rat race, never really taken a moment to pause in my life. And those 2 days were very interesting for me because it taught me to look inwards. It taught me a little bit about, my emotional health. It gave me certain tools and structures to think about, why I was taking certain decisions, what's authentic to me. And that, I think, was pretty transformational or catalyzing at that point.
Was that an uncomfortable situation or an uncomfortable experience? Because you said you'd never
I'd
really
never done that.
Looked inwards before.
So I had done a lot of journaling. I used to journal a lot, which at the time I never knew was such a powerful tool for mental health. But I think, yes, there were moments which were, quite uncomfortable. And I remember in that workshop as well, there were points when it was really vulnerable. You had to share stuff with others. And it does make you, think and question, right? And especially when you're starting to question what you've believed to be true for a long part of your life, it is uncomfortable for sure. But it was so impactful that, the kind of changes I made post that workshop or the clarity it gave me then inspired me to actually help others. So purely as a passion project, it was me and someone else who was with me in that workshop. He was a former Bain consultant from London. We decided one weekend in Mumbai to actually host a workshop of our own at Dulali, which is one of the pubs over here. 15 people showed up. We did a couple of frameworks around self-awareness and really looking inwards. The response was fantastic. We kept at it every weekend. We would host a workshop. And over the next 2 years, this actually, organically snowballed into a good, I would say, a movement where we ended up doing workshops for 2,000 or 3,000 people across India. And we were invited to do this, with CEOs, with CXOs, with college students. And one of the trends I noticed was that anyone I was speaking to, and when you scratch the surface or you make them, feel a little vulnerable, everyone was actually struggling with their emotional and their, their mental health in some ways. So I knew that there's something here for the long term, right? And the way physical health had grown as a space and evolved as a space, over the last 3 decades, I know that mental health is going to, undergo that kind of transformation. The other thing that really inspired me in my journey was my own struggles with mental health. So in 2019, which was honestly a very tough year for me, was when I had an autoimmune issue, right? And for those of you who are not familiar with autoimmune issues, it's when your own immune system attacks your body. There's chronic inflammation, and there are points when you're just so dejected, so low on energy that you can't really do anything. So it took a toll on my physical health, my mental health, my relationships. Every aspect of my life was hit. And that forced me to dig even deeper in myself, build a lot of resilience, really bounce back in terms of my own mind, body, and spirit. Get really deeper into advanced meditation practices. A lot more self-awareness was required at that point. But I think after bouncing back from that, I knew that, everything was aligning in my life to tell me that mental health is a great problem that's worth going after. I know I'm going to be passionate about it. I know I'm going to have the energy to, take this for at least for the next 5 to 10 years, even through hard times. And that's really how Evolve was born.
Rohan, your story, in a way, I do see parallels in the fact that you were in sort of a comfortable job and then decided to make a switch. So tell me, while all of this was happening for Anshul and he was on this journey, what was your story?
There are very interesting parallels between Anshul and my story. And I was also going through my corporate stints, and I was doing a couple of very interesting roles in digital businesses, helping digital businesses scale. But at some point, I realized that I really wanted to start up on my own. And I got really inspired through a course that I did at ISB on leadership and entrepreneurship. And I was like, hey, I'm going to explore a couple of ideas. But somewhere or the other, when I explored one idea or the other, I realized that there was either a lack of conviction or there was a lack of not finding the right co-founder, right? Some of the ideas were in the edtech space. There was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to create an underwear brand right? But again, I either did not find the right co-founder or there was a lack of conviction. But when I met Anshul, I found the right co-founder and I found the conviction in the idea. Personally, for me, mental health is very close to my heart as well. I've actually lost somebody really close to me to depression and suicide. And when I met Anshul, and we started chatting, I realized that this is something that's really going to keep me motivated. Every day I wake up, I'm going to feel like I want to do this because there's an impact attached to it. And my own journey also going inwards started with me doing a course, Vipassana course, which I don't know if you know, but it's basically 10 days of complete silence, and you're not supposed to talk to anybody. You're supposed to get up at 6 a.m. and there are like rigorous meditation sessions, no distractions. Your phone's supposed to be away.
It's hardcore.
It's really hardcore. But I did it in a very beautiful part. I did it in Sikkim. And that's when I realized the power of really, really working on yourself and introspecting. And I knew that, like Anshul said, that there were signs from a macro situation perspective that this is a problem, this is a challenge that we're all going to be facing as a society, and we need the smartest brains to be working on it. And I think that I feel now privileged, and also it's sort of a responsibility to now then keep at it, because it's going to be a massive challenge, and we can talk about the numbers, but it is a massive challenge.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like a noble mission. Not to say that starting an underwear company wouldn't have been,
Yeah.
But this seems a little bit more significant, a little bit more, more substance.
Honestly, when I was playing out the underwear brand over a period of time, I kind of, my conviction, my motivation fizzed down. But when I thought about building this over a long period of time, because, no matter what you say, there are going to be ups and downs. So it's about what idea, what convictions, what give you that courage to really stay at it. And then you haven't even started, and you've got to think all those things through. But it's just about how you feel. You've got to play it by the gut. And my gut told me that this was the space I wanted to be in for the long run. And again, there's nothing wrong with building an underwear brand.
No, definitely not.
We're not dissing any D2C founders over here.
So how did you guys meet then?
It's something where in hindsight it feels like, oh, this was probably meant to be. But we met at a wine tasting event, which is not how your typical founders meet, which is typically in college or you've worked together.
Were you guys both like regularly going to wine tasting events?
No, not at all. I have a friend to thank. He's a wine connoisseur. So he kind of convinced me, hey, there's this wine tasting event that's happening. And it actually happened in Bombay, very close to this place.
Yeah.
Like 5 minutes from here at St. Regis. And he was like, hey, it's 5 minutes away from your place. It's walking. Why don't you come along? Why don't you give me company? I was like, okay, great. That sounds like an idea. Maybe it'll make me feel posh and fancy for a day. And then guess who I meet? This drunk man. And I'm not talking about Anshul.
No.
I met this drunk man. He was like, hey, you've got to meet this guy who's looking for a marketing genius. And I think you are that marketing genius. And I'm like, okay, you seem to be talking rubbish at this point of time. But I think he also then approached Anshul and said...
No, I think the flip side, so my version of this was, I was living in Bombay at the time, and I had been a regular at some of these events. And as Rohan said, he was there, I think, for the first time because I'd never seen him there. And I was in the stage where I knew I was starting up, right? And I didn't have a co-founder. So naturally, as any founder who wants a co-founder, I wasn't ashamed to, wherever I would just tell people, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder. This is what I'm doing. And I knew the kind of skill sets that I was lacking, which was, really building this from business point of view, scaling, marketing. And so I was talking to the really drunk guy that Rohan referred to. And yeah, as luck would have it, he's like, oh, I think I've actually met someone who is, would be a perfect fit. And till this day, Rohan and I don't know his name.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be able to recall his face either. But he did make it a point to introduce us. And so we chatted a little bit that night. Of course, the wine and there was chocolate tasting as well. So those took center stage. But I think what was very interesting was the next day itself, both of us ended up meeting at a Starbucks, to talk this out further. I told Rohan a little bit more about some of the experiments I was doing in that space. So at the workshops, I'd also at that point actually started testing the waters with the digital product. So not what is today Evolve, but I just in a very bootstrap way, I contacted one of my ex-colleagues and we built a prototype of one of the workshop modules that was very common. And around that time, it started doing very well in Africa. We saw people, just picking this up in Africa and other parts of the world.
What form factor was this? An app or a website?
It wasn't an app. It was, so there's a module called the Wheel of Life, which helps you just introspect. It's what, life coaches will typically do with you in the first session. And we made a digitized version of this, but we did it in a way, I think, which was actually, there's a lot of these tools online, but I can still vouch for it. It's probably the best version of it that existed. And I'd validated this with coaches in the US as well. And at that time, so that was happening. I think Rohan got to also see, that I wasn't just talking through my hat. I was day in, day out working towards this. And the more I got to know Rohan, the more I realized that, it wasn't just complementary skill sets, but he had the passion as well. And then at a personal level, it was also really important to connect, right? So it's not that, you're in this for the long run. It's like pretty much like a marriage. So your values need to align. You need to get along. You need to go out and have a beer and actually have good conversation. We started playing tennis a lot. So both of us play tennis. So we started playing tennis on weekends, just hanging out.
And then I actually met his parents. So
oh yeah, then it's serious.
And then we knew it was serious. No, but at that point of time, we really got to know each other really well. And again, I've also gone through my own struggles of dealing with an autoimmune disease. We both started our career in oil and gas, and there were just so many similarities. So we said, hey, we'll spend this time to really get to know each other. And while the excuse was obviously building Evolve at that stage, but honestly, when I look back, it was really that phase of really courtship where you're really getting to know each other before you take the plunge. And I think somewhere in 2021, we spent a good 1.5, 2 years to really know each other. And then I took the plunge and I came on board as a full-time co-founder.
Sure. Yeah, 2021 is when you came on full-time. But obviously Evolve was launched a little bit earlier on. So I just want to understand, as you guys were conceptualizing this and getting closer and closer to actually launching it out into the public, what were the goals that you guys were setting? What was the perspective that you had on where you wanted this thing to go?
So I think when I started, so it was Jan 2020 when I think I felt ready enough. Like I said earlier, 2019 was a very tough year for my own physical and mental health, and so when I felt ready enough, I was really taking the plunge. At that point, I had a certain concept in mind, and I was very inspired by a lot of the workshops that I used to host, and really seeing what was working for individuals. And in fact, the first version of Evolve, we had a simple equation, which was Evolve is equal to balance plus grow, right? So it's for the times in your life when it's out of balance, you're anxious, you can't sleep, you're stressed. How do you bring yourself back to balance quickly? And then once you're balanced, how do you actually grow? So in your life, your relationships. And so that was the formula that we worked with. So in fact, the first version of the product that we had literally had 2 tabs, balance and grow, right? And like I said, the way I've explained it is exactly what it was on the product. Like you're angry, you're stressed, you're anxious. How do you bring yourself back to balance, right? So it was, so we had this concept in mind. I think the challenge was then, how do you go from having an idea to actually executing it, being a single founder who can't code. So while I understood how tech products were built, I think my biggest handicap and one of my biggest regrets to date is why didn't I take a computer science degree? It would have actually saved me a lot of time and money and just velocity as a startup.
Are you able to code, Rohan?
No, I'm also not a tech co-founder.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you guys do?
Good question.
So, I mean, it's a challenge. You're looking to problem solve. You're looking to find resources. So I think the way, like I said, I would just go around asking everyone that, shamelessly that, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder. I think I was also, putting myself out there to ask for recommendations on developers or, at that point, even agencies I was considering. And so I found an agency that I was actually very happy with. So again, the chemistry, the vibes are really good. I think that's really important for both Rohan and I as founders. The vibes we share with people, I think that really determines our willingness to take a certain, whether it's a relationship or an employee hire or a partnership forward. So I did actually, work with an agency at that point. And I was lucky enough to actually find someone who could help me design. And he was one of the top designers in India, UI, UX. I worked with a couple of design thinking experts, and these were people, again, referrals in the network, right? So whoever I could get with referrals, if they were willing to come on a contract basis, I would take them. If they were, wanted an outsourced project, I would do it. I had a certain budget in mind. And so that's how we went about, building it. And at that point, I think I realized a couple of things. One is to take something from idea to execution is just super hard. That first 0 to, that micro step is just so hard. The second thing is I actually realized that as a founder, you are wearing so many different hats, right? Like it was just insane for me to go from a predefined job title and job description to this where, I was project managing tech, I was designing the product, I was then working on content. It was just crazy.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, you were talking about the budget that you had in mind.
Yeah.
Like, how are you making this work financially? I have to imagine you guys both had like decent savings, having come from a very professional corporate background. But at a certain point, I think the money does run out, right? Did that happen to you? And if so, what options were you looking at to finance the future of Evolve?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, did have some savings at that point. And I did have enough conviction that, putting those savings into this was a great long-term investment, because even if this fails, the learnings I was getting are just insane. And at that point, a lot of my friends were actually, going to Harvard and Yale and Stanford for their MBAs. And I actually applied for my GMAT, got a good score as well, but something in me just held me back. I was like, let me actually, if I was going to invest in an MBA, I'd rather do this. And I'd seen the learnings. For the first few months itself, I was like, the pace of growth that I'm seeing personally is unmatched over here. And yeah, so for the tech part of it, we agreed a certain budget. And at that time, it was very lean. So obviously, I wasn't paying myself. And I just had, one other person that I was hiring on a contract basis, just keeping it to the bare minimum. And I knew I could sustain this for at least a year and a half. So I think at that point, it was like, it's a sunk cost, right? I'm devoting this much. I don't want to think about that anymore. Like, I don't want to be waking up at night being like, oh, this is not going well, and that's going down the drain, because you don't want that level of anxiety. But I was comfortable enough to fund it a little bit. And then when Rohan came on, he also put in, some of his savings.
Yeah, but I think at the heart of it, we knew that we wanted to fundraise, right? Because while we both have like very simple needs and like ask from our lives financially, but we knew that we wanted to fundraise not just for like the capital, but also to ensure that we were onto something, right? I think when I came on full time, one of the first things that we went after was really a fundraise, and so luckily we were able to access some really senior folks in the VC community, right? And really use them as sounding boards to pitch to them. Like we were pitching Evolve for our pre-seed raise, and I think that was really our first experience of failing. I mean, we went through pitches after pitches after pitches and rejections after rejections after rejections. But I think at the heart of those rejections was a very important message for us, and we would do debriefs after every conversation. So it was analysis, it was double analysis as to what went right, what didn't go well. And I think we came back really strong with those learnings as to what was really not working in our pitch, what was really not working in what we were building. It wasn't about just telling a story, but it was about what we were building. So I think going for the fundraise, not just for the capital, but also just to seek knowledge is an important thing that I think was a learning for all of us. And whenever somebody comes to me and says that, hey, maybe I don't need the funds, but should we be fundraising? I tell them, please go fundraise, because you'll go meet a bunch of people who've seen businesses succeed or fail. And what you learn from them is more critical than the money that they give you.
You can even tear up the term sheet if you want to, but you'll get so much valuable insight.
And we spoke to hundreds of people. And I think the trajectory of the learning trajectory that we went on was, I mean, it was exponential. I would never, even though it was our first failure, I really value that learning experience.
Yeah, I think it was some really hard-hitting questions. And for me personally, again, it was a reality check as a founder that, you know, a product and an idea is very different from a business, right? And I think I've spoken to a lot of startup founders who, you know, still live in that illusion, at least the first-time founders, where, you know, a business model takes a lot more than just a product and, you know, passionate founders, right? There's your market, your go-to-market strategies, you know, your willingness to pay, the price point you're at.
The value propositions.
The value propositions, how you communicate. So there's just so many aspects to the business model. And I think that was a bit of a reality check, because that was 1 year into the journey. And we were like, oh, you know, both of us have certain like pedigree as founders. We had access to the VC ecosystem in India, but still failed to convince anyone to, you know, back us at that point.
Yeah, because when I joined, so luckily, I mean, I come from Bits Pilani and I'm Ahmedabad. So I was like, hey, it's going to be easy for me to raise the money. Yeah, I mean, I walked in with a little bit of swagger, so to say, but also being very humble as a first-time founder and really accepting of what I was hearing. So while we got the connects in the VC ecosystem, but we also had to be sponges to really absorb what we were hearing.
So it sounds like this was a pretty difficult time. I've heard this from a lot of founders when they're going to one pitch meeting after another and the investors just keep rejecting them. Like, it can be, you start to doubt your idea and your business. You're like, was this even the right choice? If these investors who are professionals, right, who should they know what they're talking about, if they're saying no, maybe I jumped into the wrong space. But what were some of the wins that you got? Because I think if it was all negatives, it was all losing, you probably would have given up. So what were some of the small victories?
Yeah, I remember one of my friends actually took me aside and said, hey, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah.
Like, what's your plan B? If you're not able to raise funds, why? And I was like, hey, I have strong convictions. But like you said, we had some wins. And one of the biggest wins that we had was really getting picked up by Google Play Store. And we got nominated for the User Choice Award. Like, we got nominated amongst the top 10 apps in India. And
that was actually a year when Clubhouse was, booming because of the pandemic. And when we saw the list, we had Clubhouse, we had some large edtech apps, and then there was Evolve as nominated as one of the top 10 apps.
I thought it was a hoax. It was somebody who was joking around, because one fine day I was actually in Bombay. I was at Anshul's place. And he woke me up. I came out and he was like, hey, check this email out. And this was October 2021. And we'd been picked up by Google Play Store. And I don't know how. We still don't know how Evolve got picked up. People keep asking us, did you put in a nomination? Did you have connects? And I was like, hey, they just picked us up. And I mean, kudos to the Google Play Store team to actually really go through a lot of the apps that were on Play Store that was gaining popularity. I think our product was live on the Play Store, and
it had been around for a year, and I think the editorial team picked it up. Again, like Rohan said, you can't apply for these things, you can't plan for these things, and then subsequently to the being nominated as one of the top 10 apps in India, we actually got awarded as the best app for personal growth on the Google Play Store in 2021. So that came at a time when we were also getting rejected by VCs, but this suddenly gave us a lot of renewed energy that maybe we do have what it takes as a team to build something. The other thing we had started seeing by then was that, we had already started seeing that this was working globally. So even though, it wasn't at a scale that VCs would back, but we started seeing a lot of organic traction in countries like US, UK, which have more evolved mental health ecosystems. So gave us a lot of conviction that, we can actually build India to the world, right? It doesn't have to be India as a market necessarily that we were pitching to VCs.
And was that how you were initially looking at it, that this should be sort of for the Indian market, or were you from day one thinking global?
So honestly, I think it was a bit of imposter syndrome at the start, being like, who am I to build a global app? So it was thinking about the Indian market. But I think what I realized is having, spent a lot of time in urban India and then the UK, I think I was closer to building something for a global persona than, a Bharat or a tier 3 kind of persona. At least in hindsight, that's what I think. And I think the third, one of the, again, there have been these nuggets along the journey that really charge you up as founders. I also remember it took us almost 2 months after launching. So we had zero marketing budgets at that point, right? Bootstrapped. We were like literally waiting for trickles of downloads to come in from wherever, whoever is able to search or find us. And it took us, I think, 2 months to get our first paying user. And I remember how excited I was at that point. Someone's actually valuing this product to pay. And then, of course, I mean, now our scale is very different, but I still remember the name of that individual, where they were from. And I was trying to really, I spoke to him as well. But yeah, that is the kind of stuff that charges us up as founders, even the kind of user calls, right? So being in mental health, we know we're making an impact. Every few weeks, we will get an email writing to us that, hey, I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for Evolve. And especially because we're focusing on the LGBT community now, we have users who are addicted to hard drugs, have been kicked out of their homes. It's amazing stories where, they use Evolve. And we know it's saving lives. So I think anytime, at least even till today, when I feel down, I like to charge myself up by, user feedback and talking to users.
You mentioned the first paying customer, and I just want to focus on that for a second because this is a business podcast. What was the business plan? How are you planning to monetize the free user base? And maybe we could talk a little bit about, I think it's called Evolve Plus, right?
Yeah, so we have again, when we started, I think at that point, the most common business model in the space, and we wanted to start B2C, right? The plan was always start B2C because, you have to impact the end user. And so in the B2C space, subscriptions were, the obvious choice of monetizing. Again, without giving it too much thought, because at the start, the focus was more on the product. So yeah, we did have a subscription from day one.
But just to add on, I think we've had a love-hate relationship with monetization in general. So I think from day one, we are one of those few startups who've monetized. I mean, at that point of time, every VC we spoke to during the fundraise process said, hey, are you serious? Why are you even monetizing? Build a product, get PMF, and then you can think about monetizing. And we were like, no. We are building a business here and we are going to keep increasing the number of subscribers. So we went contrary to what the popular belief at that point of time was. So we monetized from day one and we kept building our learning loops on monetization. I think in hindsight, that was one of the best decisions because that's what gave us the first big insight, which is from thinking about this product from just India to then India to the globe, right? And I think at some stage we started focusing on PMF a lot more. But again, it's you've got to figure out what is the right time to monetize, what is the right time to take a step back. And it's all a journey and no one can tell you what is the right time, right? So, so we've now trying to figure out other business models and we'll talk about how we're thinking about monetizing in the long run. But at that point of time, we were just thinking about B2C subscription as the primary business model.
And how did that inform your perspective? You mentioned international.
Yeah.
So how did monetizing the app give you a different perspective on being an app for the rest of the world instead of just focusing on India?
Yeah. So I think if you're not focusing on monetization, typically what products will focus on is, user engagement and retention. And had we actually done that, we would have been very happy with India because, it's easy to acquire users here, especially when you start spending money on ads. It's, much easier to have an install or an app download in India than it is in the US. And I think we might have actually got very illusioned because the engagement was also good in India. But the moment we started looking at our premium funnels and who was willing to pay, the willingness to pay was almost 10x in a country like US and UK. And at that point, even though we didn't have the marketing budgets for those countries, we were organically getting, people downloading it, sharing it, and subscribing. So I think that data point was very important. And I think that's very important for founders not to lose sight of, the revenue and where the revenue is going to come from. And we've had, I think this is again a mistake that founders make. And in hindsight, honestly, I don't know why, we decided to monetize from day one, opposed to conventional wisdom, but it's a good thing that we did.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you started noticing this trend of people being more ready to pay outside of India. Another trend that I think you guys identified pretty early on was the fact that this app was appealing to the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that was the plan from the beginning. So just walk me through the story of kind of realizing that this was happening, but also responding to it, right? Which isn't something that you necessarily had to do. You could have just said, well, we're just going to keep it the way it is, and we're not going to necessarily like let this shape the direction that we go in, but you did. So tell me why.
You can't put a finger to what and how this happened, but it came in through very organically. So personally, I identify as a gay man. So when I think about my own journey and my own struggles of then coming out and then living my most authentic life, I realized subconsciously that there were quite a few challenges dealing with the stigma. So the first time when I started looking at data and started looking at funnels, publicly available data, I started thinking about how we can segment our users and segment the audience basis. One of the segments that we thought about was the LGBTQ segment, right? And what I realized was through the data that some members of this community face 5 times the challenges that somebody who's not from the community, right? So the starting point was just looking at the data from a different angle and a different view, and then saying that, hey, this looks like a massive inflection. It looks like a massive delta versus somebody who's not from the community. And that's when we actually ran a test. We ran an A/B test on the Google Play console. We ran a Google Play Store experiment during Pride 2021, June 2021. And we saw 50% uplift in our conversion rates. And we said, what? And our scale and our downloads just 2x'd at that point of time. And you're like, hey, there's something happening here. We've hit something here. And we started digging a little bit.
And this wasn't just a Pride Month phenomenon. So we kept the experiment going beyond Pride Month, and we realized that, the conversion rates have sort of remained. I mean, it's double of what we were doing. And I remember that time Rohan got very obsessed with the data. So he's, very experimentative mindset. And one day we were whiteboarding, and I remember walking into the room, and Rohan had this eureka moment where he was actually looking at audience sizes. So he was actually trying to estimate, the audience size for mental health in the LGBT community. And he was looking at, different primary research. He was looking at audience sizes. When you look at digital marketing campaigns, you get a sense of audience sizes. And I think that was the eureka moment when he drew out the market and segmented it. And we estimated at that point that the market for mental health in the US, at least 25 to 30% of that market comprises of individuals from the LGBT community.
But then we also started doing a lot of research.
Yeah.
So we said that, hey, we did an experiment that's shown phenomenal results. Now we've done the theoretical audience sizing. Now what we need to do is understand why this is happening, right? So we read a lot of papers, primary research by researchers, and at least personally, having gone through this whole experience, I knew that there was something. But when it's like somebody telling you what you've gone through, it's weird. It's weird when you look at and I'm like some of the experiences that this community goes through, right? Like if you think about the bullying that you go through when you express yourself authentically when you're growing up, when you actually fear the rejection of your loved ones, right? When you come out to your parents and you really fear that they might reject you. The people who are supposed to give you psychological safety, if you're fearing they're going to reject you, just say internalized homophobia in societies where there's so much stigma, where you're worried that yourself, you're not able to accept who you are. And so that just adds so many layers of stress, because you want to continue living in a shell, because you don't want to come out of it, because you're scared that you'll get discovered. So that's when we realized, reading a lot of research, and kind of we knew it in our subconscious, and we were seeing it. I had spoken to so many of my friends who were going through all of this. But those research papers really spelled it out. And there's a term called minority stress, which is more prevalent in communities where minority communities where there's stigma attached to just being your own authentic self, is when we realize that there is another challenge and there is another problem that we want to go after. So having validated the audience size, having validated the experiment that we ran, and then really understanding the problem, we said that let's take this on as our own mission, as the problem that we really want to solve. And that's when we decided to pivot from being a mental health app for everybody to then being a mental health app for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, and just adding to that, I think couple of, again, we're very data driven, right? And there were a few factors that were triangulating for us. So one was getting conviction on the audience side. So, while we were seeing a lot of statistics, like 20% of Gen Z in the US now identifies as queer. The more interesting statistic for us was that someone who is part of the LGBT community is almost twice as likely to seek out solutions, right? Or even to actually go to a therapist. So the willingness or the self-awareness to actually want to work on themselves is much higher in the community as compared to even other minority segments. And the third thing that actually gave us conviction was we started pitching this concept then to investors. So we started saying that, and again, this was reflecting on why we had got, rejected before, seeing the mental health market and realizing how crowded it is ourselves, and knowing that, we have to have a niche to stand out. And even the investor conversation started to take a very different turn, right? Again, you're never going to get 100% yeses, but I think literally in the first pitch where we pitched this, we got a yes, and at least willingness to talk the next stage. So I think all those factors coming together then help us realize that, we need to double down on this. There is 100% something here.
Okay, so you had this conviction. You definitely knew that this was a direction that you wanted to go in, sort of building this app specifically for the community. But making a pivot is hard for any startup. And you guys had already started going in one direction. So from an operational standpoint, what was it like to do this pivot?
I think for us, when we thought about the pivot, and like Anshul mentioned, we really started thinking about this specific community, and then started talking to a lot of users from this community and trying to understand their pain points. Our problem statement changed. We started thinking about not stress, anxiety, mental health challenges in general. Our problem statement changed to minority stress in this community, and then started unbundling, unwrapping minority stress with this LGBTQ community. And then we came up with really trying to understand how we can solve minority stress. And we did a lot of research and came up with like a 3C framework that really solves for this challenge. And when we say the 3C framework, we really have the first C as content by and for this community. The second C is really an in-app community, right? Which provides just that space for somebody to be themselves and find camaraderie in community, right? And then the third C being coaching, right? So really build that 3C framework, wearing the lens and keeping the problem of minority stress in mind. So content, community, and coaching. And fortunately, what happened for us at that point of time, we managed to crack Google Play Store's AppScale Academy, which was being run by Matey Startup Hub. And that really gave us a lot of mentorship to really think about how do you build products to solve for like certain problems. And so it gave us mentorship, it gave us access to technology resources to think through how do you build the best technological solution. It gave us resources with respect to even investors, right? And feedbacking from them as well. So I think all in all, when we pivoted and started operationalizing the pivot, a lot of stars aligned, right? And we got a lot of mentorship. For us, the final nail in our final belief that really hit us was when we completed our fundraise, when we said that we're solving this problem, and then we built out the solution and got this mentorship, and finally we actually completed our first fundraise by saying that we are a mental health platform solving for the LGBTQ community.
And
Okay.
actually, they both happened together. So it was the month of July in 2022 when
Yeah.
Upscale Academy's first batch was taking place, and we were part of like this select group of 30 startups, which was being mentored by Google. And this was mentorship not just on the product side, but business models, monetization, marketing, lot of mentorship. And that same month, I remember when we were going through that, we actually also closed and announced our fundraise. I think that was a great moment for us. Where we had gone from ideating and saying that we need to pivot to then having all this. And I think, post Upscale Academy, we then had a lot of clarity also in the product roadmap, as Rohan said.
Wow. You said that you were learning a lot of things at this Upscale Academy. Up until this point, I think you were purely B2C, or maybe you had experimented a little bit with B2B as a business model as well. But did you start leaning more in that B2B direction after Upscale Academy?
We keep saying this as founders, and I think the DNA of Evolve is still B2C, right? The way we started, the kind of obsession we have with the user personas and how we build. I think we did have some FOMO in 2021 where, we started saying, and early 2022 as well, where we need to think of B2B as also. And we started doing a couple of pilots with a few organizations. I think Upscale gave us the conviction then to say that, no, keep building for the user and keep, driving what actually, matters to them and this concept of product market fit. So I think that brought us back on the B2C track. Obviously, as a business, we now want to expand our revenue stream. So while, B2C subscriptions gives us conviction in the user valuing what we're building, I think, what we've realized is mental health is a very challenging space to build in. And as VCs would also tell us, there's been very few breakout companies in the mental health space globally.
Why is that?
I think a couple of things. It's not the most aspirational, problem from a user's point of view to solve, right? Users or the world, all of us in general tend to be more escapist. It's a lot of hard work to actually work on your mental health. So even if you're seeing a therapist, it will typically take, 6 months before you can even start to see some changes in your thought patterns or how you're, responding to certain situations or triggers. And in a world where, we're filled with cheap dopamine and short-term results, I think mental health is a challenge. And we also keep saying this, our competitors are not other mental health companies. Our competitors are the other apps on your phone, right? For the user who loves Evolve, Evolve is on the front screen, the first screen of their phone, not like, when you scroll 5 or 6 times and find these apps that you barely use. And we're fighting for that space with Instagram, Spotify, Netflix, right? So those are, imagine that. A user wakes up in the morning, rather than spending 10 minutes on themselves versus 10 minutes of doom scrolling, it's a lot easier to actually do the doom scroll.
We're still trying to figure out the business models writ large globally, right? Who's going to be paying for mental health in general? Is it going to be the end user? Is it going to be your organization? Is it going to be insurers? Is it going to be the government or the public health system? Right? Because the kind of we all know that mental health, the kind of challenges somebody faces eventually leads to an impact on the GDP, right? The kind of you not showing up as your best self has an impact on a big impact on the GDP. But who's going to be paying that price? Right? There's still challenge on who the payer is going to be. At the end of the day, like Anshul said, we clearly know that no matter who the payer is, unless you're able to build a product that shows improved outcomes for the patient or the user, it's not going to be a sustainable solution. So a lot of people end up even if the business model is B2B, they start building for corporates or HR managers. Ultimately, that's not your end user, right? So what we believe as a sustainable business model is what we call as the B2C2B business model, where you really focus on the end user and ensuring that they have improved mental health outcomes rather than whoever is the buyer, whoever is the payer. The end user is what you continue building, and I think that's our end goal. We'll keep trying to figure out whether we work with, say, insurers, whether we work with corporates, whether we reach out to consumers directly, but at the heart of the product is going to be somebody whose patient outcomes have to be improved.
Okay, so this is an evolving space, and it can be a difficult space to be a business in. How are you going to tackle these challenges going forward? Like, what's the roadmap for Evolve?
Yeah, so I think like we said, we're looking at this B2C2B approach where the obsession is still going to be with the user, and then figure out the payer at the end of it. And we're a tech-first company. So, at the heart of it, it's about leveraging technology, which is what we've done. And I think, I know AI is a buzzword today, but we're fortunate also to have the support of Google Cloud. So we've also now applied for the Google for Startups, the AI program. And we use Google Cloud. So, it's things like, for example, Vertex and Gemini, which is their AI components. How do you actually make learning pathways or mental health pathways more personalized, right? So we've always been very fascinated with how, when you actually go to a therapist, every session is constructed very differently, right? It's not a one size fits all. It really depends on who you are as a person and the kind of stressors that you're going through, right? And of course, your backstory as well. How do you replicate this on a product? So while we've already done a lot of work, our UI, UX, users love us. I think there's a lot to still do with hyper-personalized pathways to mental health, where, it's scaling across languages. It's really in real time improving and adapting to user outcomes. So I think that's a big part of our roadmap. Going deeper into the LGBT space as well. So, we've just scratched the surface, I think, with respect to, looking at, for example, bisexuals or the trans community. How do you then go deeper into different intersectionalities, right? So we gave the example earlier of someone who's a person of color and lesbian, right? And how do you really cater to these different intersectionalities, because that's what compounds mental health challenges. And with the 3C framework, so our roadmap on the 3 Cs of content, community, and coaching, each of those have their own roadmap as well. So we're actually launching our first, our therapy practice now, where someone who's from the LGBT community will actually have access to a therapist who also identifies as that same identity and intersectionality, right? So that is something that is so powerful. And again, just focused on user outcomes.
Very exciting. And also it's incredible to see how far you guys have come. You kind of started this journey with this idea, this notion, and it was a personal journey for you, for both of you guys. But there would have been, especially in the early days, a lot of doubt. Is this going to work out? Going to investors and getting rejection after rejection. Whereas today, this is clearly working, right? There's still a lot of things to figure out. But how do you kind of now in 2024 look back on the journey? Like what are your perspectives on what you've accomplished?
Yeah, I think there is still a long way to go. But I think the fact that we've got here, like we said, is I think testament to the resilience that we've had as founders, and our own conviction, I think, to go through the lows as well. When I look back at, I think of this trail of breadcrumbs that I like to think about, and some of these nuggets that have, popped up along the way. And for me, it's always been about the user, right? So we talked about that first paying user giving us so much joy. But there have also been so many other stories that, highlight how Evolve has touched lives. So right from, I've mentioned this, people who've been kicked out of their homes for, due to homophobia, who are at a homeless shelter in Philadelphia, have actually been paying for Evolve. And this is someone who can't afford to see a counselor, right? And actually pays for Evolve. We were showcased at the White House last year. So funny story, because one of our power users, who happened to be a leader in the LGBT community in the US, was actually invited for an event at the White House for Black Pride, Black LGBTQ History Month. And she on her own decided to just take a flyer of Evolve and talk about it and how it's been helping her. Another moment when I look back and I really pinch myself is last year for Pride Month, we were invited to be partners with Harlem Pride, which is pretty much one of the largest Pride organizations in New York. And I was asked to deliver the keynote speech over there and sharing the stage with the governor of New York. So I think when I look back, these are priceless moments. While we continue to build a business and, a lot of these answers will unfold, I think there are certain moments like this and a certain satisfaction that I've got that no amount of money or, another job could probably give me.
Yeah, Anshul encapsulated the impact that we're doing with users really well. And I think that's what's kept us going. But I also feel the last couple of years, we've really built strong partnerships, right? It's this Evolve has become a mission and it's become a movement where we're not doing it alone. We're very proud that, and we're fortunate that Google's joined our mission. We've recently got USAID that's joined our mission to really focus on the sexual and reproductive health needs of this community. We've got other partners in John Hopkins that's joined, my alma mater, Bits Pilani. They've been supporting. So I think at the end of the day, we realize that we can't do this alone. It's the problem that we're solving is massive. The impact is massive. And like Anshul said, we've just scratched the surface. And we're just so fortunate that in the last 2 years, we would not have been here for the kind of partnerships, the kind of support, the kind of cheerleading that we've got from quarters that we never could have imagined we would have got. So
both of us have been fortunate to build these partnerships and relationships, and I think, attract the kind of people, whether it's the talent, the people who've been part of our teams, and also the external world. So, we're now partnering with the University of Pennsylvania because they have an LGBTQ research wing. Bits Pilani in India, for example, we've been partnering with other universities. So yeah, just, and just a shout out to anyone out there, if you want to join our mission, just reach out to us. Very excited to have people on, whether you're a therapist, whether you're just a well-wisher, whether you're a startup founder who wants to help.
I love the parallel between members of the community needing community, right? Discovering other members and feeling like they're part of something bigger than just themselves. The challenges that they're going through feel a little bit smaller when they realize that they're not the only ones trying to overcome those challenges. And you guys, as founders, kind of having a similar journey, right? Where it's like, well, we are facing a lot of challenges, but we have people who are coming and partnering with us and joining our mission. And that makes the journey a lot easier too.
Yeah, I think the parallel is interesting, and I don't think anyone can understand the struggles of a founder if you're not a founder. That is for sure. I think India as a startup ecosystem, and you will know this, through your work as well as a podcaster, is thriving, right? I think there's more startups now than there's ever been, and while it is hard to find your support system, it is now possible. There are different channels, different avenues. Even through, for example, Google Upscale Academy, it gave us a tribe, right? So I think it's about finding your tribe, and that was good because again, it was about 30 startups which were at a similar stage and shared struggles, right? Where you've got an app, you've got you've probably got reach, but how do you actually make this a business? So yeah, we still keep in touch with some of those founders. We're part of other founder WhatsApp groups and other channels. Yeah.
Okay, so you've walked me through the plans for Evolve, what the roadmap looks like. But what about your personal roadmap? Apart from just being the founder of Evolve, what are you guys planning on accomplishing in the future?
I think the word evolve also comes from the fact that it's all our journeys of evolving. I see that happening in my own life. I think for me, there are certain elements that I want to keep in my life at all times, staying really grounded, being mindful. So even the kind of hobbies that I currently do, whether it's scuba diving, whether it's just playing a lot of sports, a lot of it is designed to, keep me in check and grounded. In terms of my career, so, I think it's all consuming right now, right? It's giving my 150%. And it's about seeing this out, again, there's no, we can't have a crystal ball and be like, oh, Evolve's going to be successful or not. But it's, it's really giving it my best day in, day out till we see an outcome. I mean, whether the outcome's an IPO, acquisition, whether it's a startup failure, just keeping that. But the way when I quit my job at Shell and decided, okay, I want to actually do something more meaningful with my career, I saw myself actually giving these 5 to 10 year time horizons or blocks of my career towards solving different challenges that are important to me. So while right now, this 5 to 10 year period of my life is solving for mental health, I think, it'll really be about taking the entrepreneurship skills I gained from this and starting to tackle another problem in the world, right? It could be something to do with climate tech. It could be maybe something on the environmental side. I have no idea what that is. But yeah, it is probably a serial entrepreneur path.
I was going to ask, so you seem like you're going down that serial entrepreneur path. What about you, Rohan? Is that something that you're planning to do, or?
I think I'm already factoring in 10 years of my life for Evolve. Post that, I'm very doubtful at this moment that I'll have it in me to again go after another startup. So maybe a novel. I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But maybe a novel or maybe politics. So who knows?
Who knows what the future holds? Or
Future.
hey, you might find it in yourself. At the end of 10 years, you start thinking about a new idea. At the end of the day, sometimes ideas are the things that push us forward, right? If you find something that you're passionate about, then maybe you find that energy to start your next company and also take that serial entrepreneur. I guess we'll look back in a decade and see where things ended up.
Yeah, I never thought that I'd be sitting here on a podcast with you. So, I mean, who knows really? And it is absolutely ideas and finding the right people in your life. So
I think a good analogy is how, sparks ignite a fire. And looking back at Evolve, I think, there are a couple of sparks that have now taken this, into a burning fire, which hopefully is going to just keep getting larger and larger. And you're right. You never know when those, never say never. You might just have a spark 10 years for something else and go for it.
That was Anshul, Kamath, and Rohan Arora, founders of Evolve. And by the way, Anshul used to be the voice of the Evolve app when it came to guided meditation, which was great because it allowed them to save money. They didn't have to hire any voice actors, but also it meant that when he would get on calls with customers, they would start to feel sleepy.
When Anshul was talking about user calls, right? One of the funniest user calls was that we get on and start talking to this user, and in the first 2 minutes itself, they're like, I'm actually feeling quite sleepy because I'm so used to sleeping to the Evolve app, and I think I can relate to the same voice because Anshul's voice is the same voice on the app. So I'm so used to sleeping to this voice that as soon as I started talking to you, I'm feeling sleepy. So
yeah, so this is also, a backstory where in the early days of Evolve, typically being bootstrapped, like I said, we were already spending money on tech. And all the studios were shut because of COVID. So I couldn't even work with a recording artist, and the studios were not even open. So I was like, okay, I've committed to doing this. I need to get some content out. So I actually taught myself a little bit of voice recording and all of that. And I set up a room in my house into a studio. So I actually put cushions on all the walls, bought like a recording, this podcasting equipment off Amazon. And yeah, in the early days, it was like, I would wait till midnight till, all the noise quietened down when everyone was asleep. And then I would go into this room and actually start recording, a lot of the audio content that was on the app. And yeah, it's an interesting story when I tell people that, I've actually made tens of thousands of people across the world sleep every month or sleep better every month. And it just feels a little weird to say that. But yeah.
But your voice is kind of soothing now that I think about it. Can you give us a little sample? Some of the content in the app?
So the intro was always, I wanted to keep that consistent and like a signature intro. And, the word hello, I could never say the word hello without, not, and you'd probably relate to this as a podcaster. And the one thing that came very naturally to me was just the words, hey there. And so I would start every audio or every meditation with words, hey there.
That's so reassuring. Hey there, friend.
Absolutely. And it became like this friendly, voice to people. But yeah, I don't want to give a snippet right now. I'll just say, some of the content is still on. Evolve, download the app, and you can listen to my voice that's actually done properly.
It's a nice plug. I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of Millionaire Mondays, and also a big thanks to this podcast sponsor, Google Play. All right, I will catch you in the next one.